"Don't wait up, Dad. I've got real priorities now." That's what he said the night before my birthday. Not cruel, just careless. Like I was a thing that used to matter. A coat too old for this season. So I didn't wait up. But I did sit. By the window, by the phone. In the same armchair I once held him in when he cried over scraped knees and broken toy trucks. I made coffee. Let it go cold. Watched the shadows move across the floor inch by inch until morning turned to afternoon. Still no call. Still no text. Just silence. 69 years old. And nothing. Not even a lazy last-minute happy birthday emoji. He used to draw me birthday cards with monsters and rockets. Now he scrolls past my name like I never gave him mine. I check my phone again. One notification. Not from him. Just a bank alert. Automatic. Impersonal. Even my money remembered me more than my son did. I went out to the shed behind the house. The one I kept locked. Inside, dust-covered old photo frames, baby shoes, and something else. The wooden box. I hadn't touched it in years, but I opened it now, because birthdays aren't about gifts. Sometimes they're about remembering what you gave and what you lost. There it was. A brass key. Small, heavy, cold. The kind of key you only give someone when you trust them with everything? It didn't belong to this house. It belonged to his. To the safe I installed in his office myself, the year he got promoted. Back when he said, "Dad, I want something from you in my office every day." I smiled at the memory. Then I frowned, because now even I wasn't allowed past reception without an appointment. Birthdays come with candles, but that day I lit nothing, only a quiet decision in my heart. He forgot me today, but he won't forget forever. Not once he opens that safe. Not once he sees what I left inside. Friends, let me pause for just a moment. Could you write in the comments? Where are you listening from? Have you ever had a moment like this, where someone you love simply forgot you? If this story touches something inside you, please consider subscribing and sharing it. It helps us grow this channel and keep telling stories that matter. Now, let's continue. The next morning, I did what every forgotten parent does in the age of glass screens and hollow gestures. I opened my laptop, not to chase attention, not to check messages, but to remind myself that maybe, just maybe, he had posted something. Anything. A photo. A mention. A sign that I still lived in the corners of his world. Instead, I found the truth. It was all over social media. Photos. Dozens of them. A luxury resort. White sand, gold lighting, perfect smiles arranged like showroom families. And there he was, my son, front and center. A champagne flute in his hand, his other arm draped around executives who once shook my hand and called me sir, back when they thought I still mattered. He stood on a stage wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my first pickup truck. The caption read, "Celebrating legacy, honoring family, building the future." I stared at that post for a long time, long enough to feel something between heartbreak and irony. Legacy? Family? Where was I in that photograph? Not in the frame, not in the caption, not even in the tag list buried beneath 100 hashtags. They raised glasses to the roots of the company, but no one remembered the man who planted those roots with tired hands and skipped meals. No one mentioned the second mortgage I took so he could launch his first product. No one talked about the months I worked in the cold, unpaid, just to wire their first office with power. Instead, they toasted each other and posted it for the world. One executive wrote, "Proud to work under a true family man. Leadership through legacy." I clicked on her profile. She had never met me, never seen the calluses that bled into that legacy. But there she was, toasting it. And in the comments, he replied, "Couldn't have done it without my incredible team, my real family, my real family." That phrase stuck to my ribs like a stone. I closed the laptop, not gently, not with grace, just shut it. Because there are silences you choose, and then there are silences you get sentenced to. That day I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat in my quiet kitchen with an untouched slice of cake and one flickering candle. Bought it myself, lit it myself, watched the wax pool slowly, like time you can't get back. I thought about the key again, the one in the wooden box, still cool, still waiting. Not for revenge, but for memory. For truth to knock louder than applause. Because someday the speeches would fade, the posts would be archived, the suits would wrinkle, and the only thing that would remain was what I left behind, in that safe, in his office, in the dark place he thought no one would ever reach. And that's where the real birthday began. I hadn't touched that box in years, not because I forgot about it, but because some things are easier left undisturbed, until life reminds you why you saved them in the first place. It sat high on the closet shelf, behind old coats and faded shirts no one asked me to wear anymore. The wood had darkened with time, corners soft from decades of being moved but never opened. It was the last thing I packed when we downsized. My wife called it your little vault. She never asked what was in it. She just smiled and said, "One day he'll understand." She passed before that day came, and now I wasn't sure if he ever would. I pulled it down carefully, hands a little slower than they used to be. I brought it to the kitchen table, the same table where we celebrated his acceptance letter to university, where I once stayed up late helping him fill out grant forms because he didn't know the words. Because I did. I knew the words, even if he forgot the man behind them. The latch clicked open, soft, metallic, familiar, and there it was, exactly as I had left it. A sealed envelope with his name, handwritten in ink that had started to fade. A single photograph, the two of us smeared with paint and sweat, smiling beside a half-built wall. The first office he ever rented. We had no staff then, just tools, trust, and time. And beside them, wrapped in an old cloth napkin, a small brass key, still cold, still weighty, not to my home, but to his, to the safe in his office, the one I helped him install with my own hands, the one he said he wanted to keep his most valuable things in. He never said what those were, and I never asked. But I remember the day we drilled the wall together. I remember holding the blueprint and hearing him say, "If anything ever happens, Dad, I'll know it's safe." I smiled at the memory, but it didn't warm me now, because something had happened. Not a fire, not a theft, but a forgetting, a slow erosion of presence, of meaning. I picked up the envelope. Inside was the truth, not a threat, not a surprise. Just the proof of things done silently, loan papers, receipts. My name, barely legible now at the bottom of contracts never filed with lawyers, because I never wanted credit. I just wanted him to fly, and he did. He just never looked back to see who built the runway. I wrapped the key in the cloth again, not out of ceremony, but out of memory. That key had lived in my pocket during the hardest months of his company's birth. Now it would return to where it belonged. But this time, I wouldn't knock. I wouldn't ask permission, because a father doesn't need an appointment to be part of the truth. I placed the items back in the box, closed it with the soft finality of a door gently shut. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly where I was going. Not to be seen, not to be heard, but to be remembered, by the lock only my hands once opened, and by the son who forgot the hands, but would soon remember the key. There's a quiet ache that lives in old hands, not from age, but from memory. Every scar, every thickened knuckle, every stubborn callus tells its own truth. And mine? They tell the story of a father who built a life for someone else before building one for himself. I wasn't born into money, but I was born into work. Honest, hard, back-breaking work. Pipes, cement, drywall. Things that cut skin but fed children. Things that go unnoticed when they're done right. Like love. Like sacrifice. I spent 37 years fixing other people's broken things. And in between, I built something for myself. A son. He used to follow me around construction sites, holding a tape measure like it was a sword. He said he wanted to be just like me. Dirty boots. Big voice. Hands that made things appear out of nothing. But children don't stay children. Dreams change, and he grew ashamed of grime under nails. He wanted suits, titles, a name that didn't smell like sweat. I never stopped him. I opened the doors he never saw were locked. When he said he wanted to start a company, I didn't hesitate. Even when the bank laughed at the idea, even when investors turned him away. He came home that night, shoulders low, voice barely there, and I told him, "Don't worry, son, we'll find a way." He never knew what that way cost. I mortgaged the house, the one his mother decorated with coupon deals and second-hand love. I sold my truck, the last new thing I ever bought for myself. I cashed out the pension I'd been quietly growing since his first birthday. No contract, no demand. Just a handshake in the dark, and a father's belief that his boy could do something beautiful. And he did. He built an empire. Technology growth, expansion. He spoke on stages, shook hands with mayors, got written up in magazines that praised his self-made story. I never once asked for a thank you. But I thought, maybe, just maybe, he'd remember the hands that lifted him there. The ones that shook behind his first loan application. The ones that caught him when he fell off his bike. The ones that held him in the hospital when he was too small to fight the fever alone. But now those hands just sit in my lap, stiff and quiet, uninvited, uncelebrated, like the man they belong to. And yet, they still have one job left. One final task. To unlock a truth buried behind a steel door. To place a memory in the one place he still values. His legacy. Because if he won't listen to my voice, maybe he'll listen to the echo I leave behind. And someday, when the applause fades and the titles mean less than silence, he'll open that safe, see the documents, see the photo, hold the weight of that little brass key, and maybe, just maybe, he'll remember whose hands built the foundation beneath his feet. It should have been one of the proudest days of my life. A wedding. My son's wedding. The child I had raised through scraped knees, broken voices, and quiet battles of adolescence, now standing tall in a tailored suit, ready to begin his own chapter. I remember buying that very suit with him. He didn't ask me to, but I offered. He accepted, not out of gratitude, but convenience. I thought maybe, in that gesture, we'd stitch something back between us. A seam of closeness, a thread of belonging. But that thread unraveled faster than I expected. The ceremony was lavish, held at a vineyard where nothing was grown by hand. Just curated beauty. Ornamental vines, tables named after countries they'd never been to, wines they couldn't pronounce. It felt more like a press release than a wedding. Guests wore names like brands. Conversations sounded rehearsed. No one talked about where they came from, only where they were headed. I was seated at a side table, not quite hidden, but far enough to know I wasn't meant to be seen. And when the time came for speeches, I stood up instinctively. But he didn't look at me. He gestured to his best friend, and I sat down, quietly, like an old worker being told his shift had ended. Then came the introductions, the part where the groom greets the guests, tells stories, names those who made this day possible. He talked about his mentors, his partners, his high school football coach. And then he smiled, lifted his glass, and said, "And of course, our family's longtime contractor, Mr. Reeves. He literally built the stage we're standing on today." People laughed politely. Some clapped. The bride looked over and gave me a quick nod. That was all. Not Dad, not my father. Just the man who built the stage. I didn't drink my champagne. I couldn't. It tasted like drywall and rust and years I'd never get back. Later, during the dance, I watched him twirl his new wife under fairy lights strung across beams I once climbed to hang. She looked up at him with adoration. She never looked at me at all, even during the father-son dance. She held his shoulder and whispered something in his ear. They both laughed. I don't know if I was the joke, but I do know I wasn't the memory. I stepped outside for air. The night was cold. Not the kind that bites, the kind that simply forgets to warm you. I stood there for a long time, staring at the barn I helped renovate for this day. He never paid me. Never asked how long it took. He just sent plans, said, "Can you do it cheap, Dad?" And of course I did. I even added extra wood beams for charm, stained the floor myself, left my initials carved beneath the altar, tiny, hidden, like me. That was the moment I knew, not just that I was being left behind, but that I had already been left, rewritten in his story as a useful man, not a meaningful one. It didn't break me. I had survived too much for that, but it hollowed something inside me, a room where fatherhood once lived. Now just a contractor's quarters. Neat, unused, unnamed. I didn't say goodbye that night. I just left before the cake. Drove home in silence. No music, no headlights for miles. Just the road. And the key still in the glove box. Still waiting, because one day he would open that safe and learn the difference between a man who builds structures and the one who built him. Late one evening, the phone vibrated on my bedside table. I answered half asleep, expecting a telemarketer or an automated reminder about my car's service. Instead, her voice, gentle, urgent, broke through the quiet. She was his executive assistant. She spoke in hushed tones about board resolutions and IT permissions, about meeting minutes I would never see. "He's changing the board access, removing your name. My name, the same name that financed his earliest dreams. The name inked on every unpaid invoice, every private loan, every midnight wire transfer when investors turned him away." I sank deeper into the mattress, heart pounding at the absurd betrayal of it all. For decades, I watched from the margins of conference rooms, my presence acknowledged only in footnotes and gratitude that never found its way into speeches. I signed non-disclosure agreements so I wouldn't embarrass him. I never asked for credit because I believed that love didn't require recognition, but to be erased by the very architect of my sacrifice felt like erasing myself. I remember the day I programmed his office safe, drilling into reinforced steel so that only two keys could unlock it, his and mine. He said it was to protect his treasures. He never suspected I might one day protect the truth instead. The assistant's voice trembled as she apologized for delivering the blow. I thanked her silently, ending the call before she could hear the tremor in my own voice. Then I sat in the dark, tracing the lines of my worn hands, fingers stiff from 40 years of labor. Those hands had earned a seat at that boardroom table, had earned more than a footnote in his annual report. Yet here I was, shut out by the shadows of my own creation. The world saw a CEO leading a billion-dollar enterprise. They didn't see the father who mortgaged his only home so that same enterprise could take flight. They didn't see the nights I spent patching walls for spare change or wiring offices for future clients. In the silence that followed, I rose and retrieved the wooden box from its shelf. Inside, the brass key gleamed under the dim light, my silent promise that the story he tried to lock away would resurface. He could strip my name from every digital ledger, erase me from the corporate web of influence, but he could not destroy the key I held, and he could not erase the truth waiting in that safe. Tomorrow, the board would convene without me. Tomorrow, he would boast of his independent success. But tonight, in that quiet house, I prepared for a reckoning far deeper than any balance sheet. I parked 2 blocks away and waited in my car until the lights inside his office building winked out one by one. The city's pulse slowed, leaving empty streets and the distant hum of air conditioners. I carried only the wooden box, cradled against my chest. No spotlight, no audience, just a son's empty empire and a father's unspoken truth. The lobby was cold marble and hushed security cameras that never once looked my way. I slipped past the reception desk, long ago replaced by silent kiosks, and walked down the corridor, where every door bore his name in gleaming letters. Each plaque felt like a monument to absence, heralding a legacy that had forgotten its foundation. I passed framed photos of him shaking hands with dignitaries, his smile everywhere but on the man who made those walls stand. At the end of the hall, I found the office suite's door, keyed lock, card reader, biometric scanner. He'd upgraded the security after our reputations clashed, confident that no one could bypass these gates. He didn't know I still held the final key. I slipped mine into the old tumbler and turned it slowly. The bolt clicked open with an echo that sounded like forgiveness and fate colliding. Inside, the safe sat behind a glass panel, nestled among modern art and expensive furniture. It looked out of place, an old sentinel guarding deeper secrets. I lifted the latch, recalling the day we installed it together, our hands working in silent partnership. I would never forget how proud he was then, believing me only a craftsman. Now I was the keeper of unvarnished history. I opened the safe, the door swinging on whispered hinges. I placed the sealed envelope, the photo of us drenched in sweat and joy, and the faded contracts among his other treasures. My letter sat atop everything, a quiet revelation that would reverberate louder than any boardroom speech. I closed the door just as softly, never pausing to relish his discomfort. This was not revenge, but remembrance, not punishment, but paradox, the gift of truth to a son who thought he knew the price of success. I left as I came, without spectacle, without apology, without fear. The corridors swallowed my footsteps, and the city's heartbeat rose again around me. In the night's velvet hush, I felt something settle in my chest, a peace born not of reconciliation, but of release. He would learn soon enough that some legacies aren't in plaques or PowerPoints. They live in the hands that build, the silences that scream, and the keys that unlock a story no one can rewrite. When I slipped the envelope into the safe, I knew its contents would shake the foundations of everything he thought he'd built alone. Later that night, I pictured him standing before that metal door, the click of the latch louder than any applause he'd ever heard. Inside that thin parchment lay more than paper. It held the weight of decades, the invisible ledger of 2 lives entwined. He would find first my original loan agreement, yellowed at the edges, listing sums I'd never meant to reclaim and interest I'd never charged. Beneath it, the photograph we'd taken at dawn on a dusty construction site. Him in overalls too big, eyes shining with curiosity as he handed me a hammer. It was his first real glimpse of what it meant to build. Sweat, dust, and unspoken pride. And then folded between those memories, the notarized letter, its words concise yet relentless. This company stands on sacrifices, not just dreams. I signed it at the bottom, not as an afterthought, but as proof that love, like cement, binds even when it goes unnoticed. No flourish, no flourish. Just my name in a silence so deep it spoke of every night I worked instead of rested, every meal I skipped so he could eat. When he read it, he would see the skeleton of his success, the quiet bones of sacrifice he refused to acknowledge in life. And in that reckoning, he would understand that true legacy isn't written in stock prices or titles. It's written in the hands that bleed behind the scenes, in the hearts that hope for remembrance, and in the keys that unlock truth no wall can ever hide. 2 weeks slid by like an unwelcome shadow before the call came. Emergency board meeting at 9. I felt the tremor of anticipation more keenly than my morning coffee. He would enter that room armored in prestige, sure that his world remained untouched. But I knew better. I had ignited something far louder than any stock ticker, an ember of truth no boardroom could smother. He stepped up to the polished mahogany table, greeted by stiff nods and polite smiles. PowerPoint slides glowed behind him. Quarterly growth charts, expansion plans, strategic acquisitions. He clicked through each one with the confidence of a man who believed he owned every achievement. Then the chairwoman, her face taut with unexpected gravity, cleared her throat. "Before we discuss tomorrow's pipeline," she began, voice brittle with controlled anger, "we have new information." A stack of papers passed from hand to hand. Yellowed loan agreements, a faded photograph, and the notarized letter that cut through the corporate veneer like a surgeon's scalpel. Gasps fluttered around the room. Chairs shifted, ties tightened. His face faltered as he recognized the handwriting. He saw that photograph first, the 2 of us beneath half-built beams, laughter caught in midair, dirt on our cheeks. He remembered how I had coaxed him up onto that scaffold, teaching him balance and resilience in equal measure. Yet here, surrounded by people who called me contractor, he saw a father who had never left his side. One executive rose, voice echoing, "Why wasn't this legacy ever disclosed? Why did we let his contributions stay hidden?" Others nodded, eyes alight with indignation. The CFO's lips trembled as he spoke of breached fiduciary duty. The legal team murmured about restitution, and junior board members whispered apologies in the corridor. He stood in the center of that storm, suit impeccable, but shoulders drooped under the weight of revelation. Pride crumbled into regret. He opened his mouth, likely to apologize, to say he'd meant no harm, that he'd assumed my sacrifices were known, but no word soared above the thunder that rolled through the room. It wasn't just about missing acknowledgments or amended bylaws. It was about erasing a man who shaped every brick of that enterprise. The chairwoman's gavel struck the table, summoning order. "We will amend all records. We will recognize Mr. Reeves as co-founder and benefactor. We will correct our mistakes." The sentences cut clean through decades of silence. Contracts would be rewritten. Plaques would be mounted. A public statement would honor the man the world had overlooked. I watched from the doorway, unseen yet present, in every stunned glance he cast. I felt the tremor of vindication, not triumph, but release. They might restore my name to corporate annals, dedicate a wing in my honor, cite my loans and financial disclosures. Yet the most profound reckoning was already written in the quiet ache of his eyes, in the sharp intake of breath, when he looked at me across that boardroom. He would learn at last that legacy is more than spreadsheets and brand campaigns. It is the story that lives in the hearts of those who built, not just dreamed. And in that storm's aftermath, when the dust settled and the cameras left, he would know that his true inheritance was never profit or prestige. It was the silent, unyielding love of a father who made him believe he could soar. I found him slumped against the marble wall, shoulders heaving as though the weight of every unsaid word had finally crushed him. The fountain's gentle spray murmured behind us, the same fountain I'd installed when he first bought this building, polishing brass nozzles and laying granite stone with my own hands. He looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed and hollow, voice trembling like a child lost in a storm. "Why didn't you tell me what you left?" I stayed silent, tracing the patterns of water on the polished floor, letting the echo of his question hang in the cool night air. Finally, I spoke without turning. "Because if I had to tell you, son, it means you forgot who I was." He closed his eyes as if to block out that truth, and the corridor felt colder, the bright lights above us flickering in sympathy. I remembered every late-night conversation, every moment he leaned on me for strength, never realizing his own foundation came from my quiet sacrifices. Now he trembled at the realization that his fortress had been built by hands he barely acknowledged. Tears slipped down his cheek, unguarded and sincere, and something in my chest shifted, pain and relief intertwined. He reached for the brass key in his pocket, the one I knew he had retrieved after the boardroom storm, its metal edges worn from restless nights. He held it out to me, but I shook my head, stepping closer so he saw every line etched in my weathered face. In that moment, he wasn't CEO or success story. He was my boy, frightened, regretful, desperate to rebuild what had been broken. He whispered, voice raw, "I lost more than a company, didn't I?" I knelt beside him, letting the tail of my jacket brush against the stone floor. "No," I said softly, "you nearly lost a father." He buried his face in his hands, and I placed my own, scarred and steady, on his shoulder. In the hushed glow of the corridor, the son who once forgot my birthday finally saw the man who'd marked every day of his life with love, sometimes unseen but never gone. And as he wept, I realized this was the real foundation. Forgiveness. It glowed brighter than any plaque, stronger than any contract, and deeper than any loss. In that quiet collapse, father and son found each other again. He stood on my porch in the gray light of dawn, the envelope clutched in his trembling hand like a lifeline. No cameras captured this moment. No grand motorcade announced his arrival. He was just a man in a suit, too fine for his own pain, a father's son come home to face his reckoning. I opened the door and saw the weight in his eyes, an apology unspoken, regrets piled high like the unpaid bills I once settled for him. He held out the envelope as though it were a white flag. "I don't deserve a second chance, but if you ever need a chair at the table, it's yours again." His words hung between us, fragile as glass. I felt the years roll back, the scraped knees I kissed, the late-night talks when he feared failure, the brick walls we built together at dawn. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. Instead, I stepped aside and let him pass. His footsteps on my hardwood floor felt like the first steps of a journey we both needed to take, one toward forgiveness, the other toward humility. As he crossed the threshold, I realized that this apology in a suit was more than contrition. It was the beginning of a bridge between two hearts weathered by pride and time. And when I closed the door behind him, I felt the silence settle, not as emptiness, but as a space where new memories could be built, carefully and together, on the hands that never stopped caring. When I stepped into his office again, I almost didn't recognize the place. The glass walls still gleamed, but now they reflected something I never expected to see, my own face. There, above the sleek conference table, hung a large photograph of me, hands stained with concrete dust, eyes proud beneath a hard hat, captured the moment I taught my son how to swing a hammer without fear. Below it, a simple brass plaque read, Foundation, Mr. Gerald Reeves, Builder of Dreams. A rush of warmth flooded my chest, mingled with a tender ache that decades of silence had carved into my ribs. He didn't stop there. The reception area had been redesigned. My old tool belt, worn and patched, hung behind glass, each leather loop labeled with the tools I once used to shape the world around me. A corner of the room displayed the wooden box I'd kept hidden for years, now open to reveal the brass key resting atop the loan agreements and the photograph of him as a child. The key lay framed and untouched, its surface gleaming as though its story was still being written. Each element spoke not of corporate grandstanding, but of a son's gratitude finally set free. I wandered through that space as if I were walking through a piece of my own history. The faint scent of sawdust lingered in the air, carried there by his careful recreation of my workshop in a corner, complete with a workbench lit by industrial lamps and a faded blueprint tacked to the wall. He had preserved every scratch on the table's surface, even the gouge where I once cut myself and cursed under my breath. It was his way of telling me that every mark I left behind was seen, remembered, and honored. My heart clenched at the sight of his seat at the conference table, the one facing mine. It was not lower or higher, but equal, a silent acknowledgement that I belonged there. On his desk, next to the newest fiscal report, lay the key once more, waiting for me should I ever need it. He hadn't dared use it. He knew that some doors must be unlocked by the hand that hungers for truth, not by one seeking closure. In that exquisite redesign, there were no logos, no mission statements, no hollow accolades. Instead, there was honesty. There was humility. There was a son who had rebuilt not just walls and pipelines, but his own heart, constructing a place where father and son could stand side by side again. And as I stood in that room, surrounded by reminders of every sacrifice I ever made, I realized the greatest makeover was not the one I was witnessing. It was the one he had performed on himself, from a man too proud to share his gratitude to a son unafraid to display his love in plain sight. This year the morning sun found me still in bed, not shrouded by disappointment, but by anticipation I hadn't felt in decades. No unanswered messages flashed on my phone. Instead, a single notification glowed with his name. Dinner at 7. Just you and me. I dressed slowly as though savoring each breath and made my way to a small restaurant he'd chosen, quiet, unpretentious, warm with candlelight. When I arrived, he was already there, waiting at a corner table beneath a low-hanging lantern. His eyes met mine with something raw and unguarded. Hope, perhaps fear, but most of all remorse transformed into love. He stood as I approached, not in the stiff formality of a CEO receiving a guest, but as a son welcoming his father home. We sat in comfortable silence, menus untouched, letting the moment stretch like fine wine. The waiter brought a single flower in a bud vase, placed it between us. I studied its delicate petals and remembered all the birthdays I'd marked alone, hoping he might one day show up. Now, here he was. No fanfare, no digital broadcasts, just genuine presence. He raised his glass, voice steady but tender. Dad, you taught me the cost of forgetting. Today I remember. The words fell softly, yet cut through years of emptiness. I saw the weight lift from his shoulders as he spoke, an offering that needed no reply. Later, back at the office the next morning, he gathered his entire staff in the newly adorned conference room. Cameras were silent, cell phones discreet. He cleared his throat and looked straight at the framed photo of me that he'd commissioned. Yesterday, he began, voice resonant, I celebrated something I nearly lost, my father's presence. He showed me what it means to build not just a business, but a life worth remembering. To every one of you, never take for granted the people who guide you before fame and fortune arrive. He paused, then continued, eyes scanning each attentive face. I want you to know that the real foundations of this company weren't balance sheets or venture capital. They were the years my father worked in silence, so I could stand here in light. Today, we honor him. The room filled with quiet applause, heartfelt and sincere. No empty corporate slogans, just respect for a man who had already rewritten his son's future. I sat in the front row, chest tight with pride and relief. The key in the plaque behind him caught the dawn's light, shining like an oath fulfilled. In that moment, the story of my forgotten birthday was no longer a wound, but a promise kept. That memory once lost had been reclaimed, and that from now on each birthday would begin, not in the hush of neglect, but in the warmth of remembrance. He returned the envelope to its wooden cradle, but he didn't leave it untouched. Carefully he slipped inside a single sheet of ivory stationery, his own handwriting, elegant yet unsteady. Legacy isn't stored. It's passed on. Beneath this quiet declaration, he placed a freshly printed will, every clause rewritten, every beneficiary reconsidered, and one name now inscribed in bold, unwavering letters where it had once been absent. Mine. I discovered it that night when he called me back to the office under the pretense of closing unfinished business. Instead, he led me to the alcove where the safe stood, a shrine no longer to hidden debts, but to shared truth. He opened the door himself, lifting the layered contents with reverence, as though unveiling relics both fragile and eternal. When my eyes fell on the legal document, I saw not just paper, but the map of his heart, charting a path that returned me to the center of his world. The note, the simplest of words, rang louder than any board resolution. Legacy could not be locked away, for it lived in the courage to remember, the grace to forgive, and the promise to pass that memory from one generation to the next. In that transformed sanctuary, the safe had become sacred, a vessel for the bond we once lost and now would carry forward together. Now, each year when my birthday dawns, it arrives not with unanswered calls or ignored calendars, but with footsteps echoing down the hallway. He doesn't just call voicemail or send a text stamped with digital obligation. He comes for me. He arrives at my door. No suits, no speeches, just a father and son reunited by something more enduring than time. And in his hand he holds our most precious inheritance, our story. He takes his own boy, my grandson, by the hand and leads him through the polished corridors of the office I once built from the ground up. The child's eyes widen at the framed photo of me under the hard hat, at the brass key glowing beneath the plaque that now bears my name. He watches as his father kneels beside the safe, lifts the latch with the same well-worn key that once hung in my pocket, and opens it with a tenderness I never saw on grand stages or in corporate addresses. Inside lies more than faded documents or yellowed photographs. It holds the echo of every sacrifice I made in silence, the shimmer of every night I labored alone, so that his world could shine brightly. And as he pulls out the envelope, carefully, reverently, he turns to his son, to my grandson, and begins to speak. He tells him about the man who built walls and hopes with equal determination, the man who never asked for praise, but whose love was the truest foundation of every dream. I stand a few steps back, heart fluttering like a sparrow, freed from its cage. I watch my grandson's eyes fill with wonder, his small hand tightening around his father's. I watch my son's eyes fill with tears, not the tears of regret, but of gratitude, finally spoken aloud. And in that sacred space, I realize the greatest gift is not housed in bank vaults or safe deposit boxes, but in stories passed from one heart to another, carried in voices that remember and hands that never forget. When they turn to me, I feel a warmth that memory alone cannot kindle. They have given me more than a seat at the table or a name on a plaque. They have given me the gift of being seen, truly seen, as the man I have always been. Not just a contractor, a financier, or a silent partner in his success, but a father whose love built a legacy far stronger than steel or stone. That night, as the three generations stand together under the soft glow of the office lights, I lay my hand on my son's shoulder and smile at my grandson. No words are needed. Our bond is etched in the gentle press of my palm against their backs, in the unspoken promise that this story will continue, hand to hand, heart to heart, for as long as we breathe. And I at last feel remembered, not for what I gave, but for what I never stopped being, his father.